Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon your brothers and sisters. Today's video we're going to be reading a passage from the flashes. This is the 28th flash, and this is actually about Eid. Now, I did want to make this video during Eid, but given the circumstances, I was unable to. I'm also sorry for uploading this video late, or making this video late. I was actually going to post it 2 days ago, but I was unable to download it, so I'm actually retaking this. So without further ado, let's get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I shall explain a matter that unfolded before the gaze of my imagination one glittering night of the festival, while watching from my prison window through the lens of prudence and foresight the laughter of mankind that would turn into tears. As the lives of people of previous ages who lie in the graveyard may be seen in the cinema, so I as though saw the moving corpses of people who would inhabit it in the near future. I wept for those merrymakers. All of a sudden, a feeling of desolation and pity came over me. I turned to my intellect and asked of reality, "What is this imagining?" Reality replied, saying, "Okay, so let's stop here and try to understand what the paragraph is saying, what the Risale-i Nur is saying here." So this thought is in prison, and from his prison window, he sees a festival, okay, some sort of celebration of some sort, okay, and he feels very upset when he sees these people because just as how like in a cinema, for example, like if you watch a really old movie, you might see people who, like many of the actors, if not all of them, have already died, So just like that, he sees the people in this festival, and it's as if like they're already dead, right? It says here they're moving corpses, as if they're already in the graveyard, okay? And he feels this desolation. It says here desolation and pity for them. And I think the reason for that is because the reason he believes that these people, right, are going to be devastated in the future, right? It says about how their laughter will turn into tears. This is assuming that these people go without having faith and without believing in God, without striving in his way, right? So they lead faithless, sinful lives. Okay, so assuming that happens, okay, while they are right now laughing and while they are enjoying themselves, they're very festive. In the future, they're going to be very devastated. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so in 50 years' time, out of the 50 who are now laughing and enjoying themselves with such joy, 5 will be bent, stooping 70-year-olds, while 45 will have rotted in the graveyard. Those beautiful features and joyful smiles will have been transformed into their opposites, according to the rule of all that is coming is close, since it is to some degree true that things that are going to happen in the near future are seen to have already arrived, then surely what you see is not imagination. So let's stop here as well. So in 50 years' time, out of the 50 who are now laughing and enjoying themselves with such joy, 5 will be bent and stooping 7-year-olds. So there are 50 people at this festival. In 50 years later, 5 of them will be old and hunched over. The rest of them, the majority, the other 45, will be dead. They'll be in the graveyard. Those beautiful features and joyful smiles will have been transformed into their opposites. So the people who are old and hunched over, well, they're no longer beautiful. They're no longer youthful. And the people who are in the graveyard will also be very devastated and will be in a very devastated state. This also includes the 5 people who are old. And the reason for that is because they led faithless and sinful lives. Now, why does this make you miserable? Now, we've talked about this a lot on this channel. The reason for that is because when you lead a life that is devoid of faith, that is devoid of belief in God, that is devoid of a belief in an afterlife, okay, that is filled with sins, one's life turns into hell. We usually think of heaven and hell as something that's in the afterlife, but it's also in this world as well. If you believe in God and you strive in His way and you try to do good things, your life will turn into a sort of paradise. You'll be very happy because as man, we're infinitely needy and we're also powerless. So we need to have a creator, an all-powerful creator to rely on. Okay, but someone who doesn't believe in God, who rejects Him, who doesn't strive in His way, has no one to rely on to secure his needs. And he also has a purpose that is, he also has a life that's devoid of any meaning. Okay, I know it's really difficult for, I know it's very difficult for us to do this, right? But as a believer, whether you're a Muslim or a Christian, or you adhere to some other faith, right? Just try putting yourself into the shoes of someone who does not believe in God, who doesn't believe in an afterlife. It's a very difficult perspective to grapple with, but it's very terrifying, right? Think about it. Your loved ones, your friends, your family, right? The people that you know and have affection for, they're going to die and become nothing, okay? You're also going to die and become nothing. The suffering that you experience in this life is meaningless. The any purpose that you have in this life is also meaningless, right? There's so many books and videos out there, right? There's like podcasts, you have like philosophers, right? People who study philosophy, all of this, people who are like trying to show how you can be happy in life. But the problem is they take God out of the picture. And because they do that, the answer to being happy in life is ultimately not found because they're taking God out of the picture. Okay? You can't be happy in this life, or to put another way, to have a meaningful life, or a life driven by a true purpose without God. Because then your life, your purpose, is confined to this world. And this world is very transient. Okay? So, for example, I'm a writer. If I, God forbid, left religion, if I left Islam, and I just dedicated myself to writing, that was my purpose, well, that's good and all. Maybe 40 years later, I will have written some 200 books, but once I die, and I won't be able to write books anymore, and that's that. That purpose is just a very transient purpose. There's no extension. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's a very ephemeral purpose. Okay. Those beautiful features and joyful smiles will have been transformed into their opposites. According to the rule of all that is coming is close, since it is to some degree true that things that are going to happen in the near future are seen to have already arrived, then surely what you see is not imagination. So if you think about it, this was written, what I'm reading here, 100 years ago, okay? And when Ustad makes this, when he talks about how these people at the festival, right? He says in 50 years' time, most of them will be dead. Well, this was around 100 years ago, and all the people in that festival are probably dead. It's very unlikely that some, if not any of them, are alive. So it's already happened, and this once again emphasizes the transience of life, or really the passage of time. Time passes by very quickly. Okay, it passes by very quickly. And to sort of understand that, you can just sort of look at your own day to understand this. Like you get up in the morning, the next thing you know, it's over the evening. You don't even understand what happened, right? And like I read it in a book once. It was written by this Christian professor, I think. But in this book that I read, he said that the average lifespan, and by the way, that book was actually critiquing books that talk about being happy in life, but in a secular way. Okay, so just wanted to mention that. He was talking about how the average life, like I don't remember the exact number, but it roughly has 20,000 days, right? So if you think about every hour that passes by so quickly, every day that passes by so quickly, the human life is very short. You can ask people who are around their 40s, right? You can ask people, right, in their 30s, 40s, just ask them, or even above that, just ask them, how fast did your life pass by? They'll probably tell you that it passed by very quickly, I've asked this question to people before, and that's usually the answer that they give me. So life is very short, and it passes by very quickly. Moving on. Furthermore, since the heedless laughter of this world veils bitter facts that thus turn it into tears, and is temporary and subject to decline, most certainly it is only thankful, innocent enjoyment within the bounds of the licit which leads to awareness of God's presence and dispels heedlessness, and pleasures that will be permanent by reason of their reward, that will cause joy to wretched man's eternity-worshipping heart and his spirit, which has an irresistible desire for immortality, and make them smile. So this is really interesting. It says here, the heedless laughter of this life, of this world, veils bitter facts. What are the bitter facts? I think the bitter facts that are being mentioned here are death, old age, sickness, etc. Things of that sort, okay? These are, of course, now, the thing is, because when you plunge into the pleasures of this world, when you're young, okay, and let me emphasize this, when you're young, those bitter facts are concealed. Just to give us an example, I think he gives it a few times. He gives it more than once. About like an ostrich that sees a hunter. It might also be in like some examples of storm, but it sees like some sort of danger, and what it does is it just plugs its head into the ground, which doesn't really solve the problem. That's kind of what that's basically what you might do when you're young, where things like death are coming. You have this massive storm of death, of illness, right? Of death, illness, old age, right? These things are approaching you, and you just sort of plunge yourself into the pleasures of this world. But it says here, it says, the heedless laughter of this world veils bitter facts that thus turn into tears. Why is that? Because the bitter facts of this life will eventually come to confront you. You will eventually become old. You will, assuming you live that long, you will you might get sickness. You might get sicknesses when you also get old, right? And death is going to come for all of us. Okay, so while you're young, once again we're emphasizing this, and you indulge in these pleasures, you can sort of forget about that, but it's temporary. I also want to mention here, while we're talking about youth and these matters, I talked about how in my last video about how this youth that I met at this event that I went to for Reed was he was an atheist, and when my dad, I believe it was my dad who asked him, he said, "What's going to happen to you when you die?" And he just very casually said, "I'm going to become nothing." Now, the reason that at a young age you're very nonchalant with us is because you're young. You don't think about death, right? I'm actually very amused at like young people who become atheist, right? They don't believe in God and afterlife. I'm very amused because it's like these people, like these young people, they're around my age, older, whatever. Right now they're young, so it's very easy for them to be irreligious, But when they get old, that's when the whole story changes. I've mentioned this story before. My dad's friend went to this hospital once, and at the hospital there were patients. Some of them were Christian, and then some of them were irreligious. They didn't believe in God or an afterlife. And he made a very interesting observation. The people in the hospital that believed in God, right? So the Christians, they were very relaxed because in their mind, like they were at the end of their lives. They were very relaxed because they thought, okay, well, I'm going to die, but I'm going to go to the afterlife, right? Christians also have an afterlife belief. But the patients who were also near the end of their life that were irreligious, they were in a constant state of fear because they're worried about death. For them, once again, like from their perspective, we think about it from their terrifying perspective, they don't have an afterlife belief. Once they die, that's it. Like your story ends. Okay, you flip the last page. Okay, you shut the book, put it into the highest shelf, and then for years on end, it just collects dust. Okay, and that's it. You never get to see your loved ones again, your friends, your family. Yeah, that's it, the end. So if you see the sort of stark contrast between these perspectives, you can understand why one group is very nonchalant when it comes to death, because they have a belief in the afterlife, while the other group is not, right? So those people, for example, they're confronted with the bitter facts of life. So I'm specifically here talking about the irreligious people. I mean, the Christians, for example, they were also confronted with that, but they had a different reaction to it because of their perspective, okay? Why am I mentioning this? Well, when you're young, I don't think like when you're young, you're in a fear of death, because you don't think about death. I mean, take it from me, I'm not like a 40-year-old Hoja who's making this video. I'm 16 years old, and I would know. You don't think about death when you're young. You don't, okay? But, once you reach the age of 40, right, and you come into the midlife crisis, that's when things start to change, okay? So I would like to just mention that. And it says here, the heedless laughter of this world veils bitter facts that thus turn into tears and is temporary and subject to decline. What's temporary and subject to decline? The laughter of this world, okay, which is symbolic for the pleasures of this world. Once again, there's a constant emphasis being made here. The pleasures of this life are temporary. They're temporary. They're very short-lived, okay? So you can throw yourself into these pleasures, but they're short-lived, They're not long-lasting, okay? Most certainly, it is only thankful, innocent enjoyment within the bounds of the licit which leads to awareness of God's presence and dispels heedlessness. Now, I have a question. What is heedlessness? If you search up heedlessness, okay, like you go to Merriam-Webster Web or some other dictionary, and you search out what heedlessness is, it'll usually give us a definition like not taking notice, not being thoughtful, being careless, right? Like, for example, if you've ever went to a mountain, okay, like you might find like a sign which like points to some sort of danger, right? So let's say, for example, you and your friend are taking like a mountain path, right? And there's a sign that says that there's like some sort of bear or there's like a mountain lion, okay? But you don't even heed the sign, okay? You're completely oblivious to it because your friend is showing you this nice cooking show, and then you continue down the path, and then there's a lion that comes and ends up eating and cooking you, right? So kind of that basically captures the gist of heedlessness, right? Not taking notice, just being like very careless. Essentially, when we plunge ourselves into these pleasures, right, we're essentially being heedless to what? We're being heedless to the bitter facts of life. We're being heedless to the bitter facts of life. But once again, it's temporary, and it doesn't shield them, or it doesn't conceal them forever, okay? So it is only thankful, innocent enjoyment within the bounds of the licit, which leads to awareness of God's presence and dispels heedlessness, right? So when we're talking about pleasures, we're also talking about licit and illicit pleasures, okay? So pleasures that God allows and does not allow, right? So by plunging, if we refrain from illicit pleasures, okay, and we are also thankful to God for the bounties that He bestows upon us, this not only leads to an awareness of God, right, it also dispels that heedlessness, okay? And pleasures that will be permanent by reason of their reward, that will cause joy to wretched man's eternity worshipping heart and his spirit, right? So I mentioned how, for example, there are these like books, there's a lot of videos about how to be happy in life or how to find meaning in life. The problem is the pleasures of this life, as we mentioned, are temporary. They can't satisfy you. What we want is eternity, right? We want internal or ever continuous pleasures, which we don't have in this world, okay? For example, here, my mom just brought like these nice Danish butter cookies, right? I like eating these with a nice cup of coffee. I don't know if I should drink coffee at this age, but anyways, I could like do it after this video, but after I finish it, it's done. It's finished, right? What we want, right, is continuously eternal pleasures. Continuously eternal, okay? That's what we desire, and that's why the pleasures of this life cannot truly satisfy us, okay? It is because of this, so this is the last paragraph, it is because of this that there are among the narrations many that strongly encourage thanks and remembrance of God at festival times in order to prevent heedlessness from prevailing and deviation into the illicit. To do this at such times may transform the bounties of joy and happiness into thanks and make the bounty continue and increase it. For thanks increases bounty and dispels heedlessness. It is because of this, so once again, let's look at the first sentence. It is because of this that there are among the narrations many that strongly encourage thanks and remembrance of God at festival times. So when it says festival times, this is actually a reference to Eid, okay? So thanks and remembrance, or the remembrance of God, gratitude, and also, so gratitude and remembrance of God, by the way, this also appears in the first word, it helps prevent heedlessness and also deviating into the illicit, okay? To do this at such times may transform the bounties of joy and happiness into thanks and make the bounty continue to increase it. For thanks increases bounty and dispels heedlessness, right? So gratitude for the bounties that God gives us also dispels the heedlessness, okay? So I'm going to stop here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, were able to benefit from it. Once again, I'm sorry for making this video late, and inshallah, I will see you guys next time. Al-Fatiha.